Hello everybody and welcome to our Easter special of Sprite Academy. One thing that I really love about Easter is all the symbols. At Easter time we have a whole bunch of different symbols for rebirth. We have eggs that symbolise the birth of a new bird. We have symbolism of springtime, including rabbits and flowers, which represents the birth of a new cycle of seasons. And at Easter time, Christians also celebrate the rebirth of Jesus rising from the dead. I guess the problem that we have with all these springtime sorts of symbols that come from the northern hemisphere is that we don't celebrate Easter in springtime. So I guess in Australia we need to find other symbols of rebirth at Easter time. So this video is going to look at a bunch of native Australian flowers that bloom in autumn time. By using these flowers, we are still symbolising the idea of rebirth through this idea of the flowers blooming. But since they bloom in autumn, which is when we have Easter in Australia, it is a much more Australian way of celebrating Easter. The first flower we're going to draw is a Banksia. Now, as you see here, I'm just trying to draw the basic shape before I go in with the details. So I'm trying to work out here what is the sort of broad geometric shape for my Banksia, and I've sort of concluded here with a little bit of a paddle pop stick shape, and a few of those lines I'm just going to end up ignoring. So the bottom of the flower is mostly rectangular and then coming up to a curve at the top. I've also just drawn the stem, and now I'm drawing in the basic shape for some leaves. So I'm not doing these in much detail at all yet, I'm just creating sort of big sausages which are coming out of my flower. So now I'm just finalising the shape of that Banksia, more into that paddle pop shape, and just getting exactly where I want the lines for that Banksia to go. And now I'm going to start doing some pen work. So I'm going to be drawing all the little details in the Banksia. Those little sort of petally things that you see on a Banksia are actually thousands of little flowers. So that's what these little curvy lines that I'm drawing here are. So I'll just give you a close-up on them so that you can see more precisely what I'm doing. You'll also notice as I'm drawing these little curvy sausage shapes that I'm creating are pointing more upwards towards the middle, so that the middle flowers are pointing towards the top of the Banksia, and as I move more towards the left and towards the right, they're sort of curving outwards a lot more. So I'll just speed up the rest of this step. One of the really cool things about Banksias, which is the reason it's relevant to our video, is because they actually flower during autumn and winter. Now we're just going to move in now to drawing the leaves. So as you can see, the edges of these leaves that we have for Banksias are really ragged. We sort of need to do little zigzags coming up as we are creating those leaves. I think probably the best way of doing the leaves is by drawing the middle bit first, and then drawing the zigzagged edges around that line you create in the middle. And I also recommend that you, rather than just a single line, you create a double line, because that's sort of gives it a more three-dimensional effect. You can see that this leaf that I'm doing right here has sort of bent over, and I'm drawing the back of it right now, but there's also a little bit of it which is twisted around and bent over, so that's another really cool thing that you can bring into your Banksia. Alright, let's speed up this leaf drawing and move on to the next step. Banksias are also apparently really great flowers to have in your garden because they attract native animals. Great, so now we're going to start filling in these leaves a little bit. So we're going to be drawing lines coming out of the leaf on a 45-degree angle, so I'll just give you a bit of a close-up of what that looks like. So we just want lots of little lines coming up like this onto all of our leaves, so I'll speed that one up for you as well. We're also going to do something different for the leaves that we're drawing the back of, like this one and the one on the left. So instead of drawing those lines coming up, we're just going to do a little bit of stippling around the middle of the leaf there. And now I'm just drawing the stem coming down, and I'm going to draw a few little circles around the bottom of the Banksia, and then down comes our full stem. And now I'm just going to add a few more details into the stem there. So I'm going to do some contouring. So I'm going to go around the shape of the curve with some lines. I'm imagining that I have my light source in the top right of the picture, so just in the bottom left of the Banksia here I'm doing a little bit of stippling just to give it a little bit more of a three-dimensional effect with some shade. And now I'm just going to add a few more details to the stem here, so I'm just going to almost just put in a few little scribbles here and there, just to give it some of those imperfections that make it look more realistic. So now I've just moved down on the page a bit to do our second flower, called a Courier, and this is another Australian native flower that blooms in the autumn and winter. So these flowers are in a beautiful bell shape, and you'll see here I'm creating two ovals to make that bell shape. So a long oval coming down in the direction of the stem, and then another oval going in a perpendicular direction from that. So you can see we've got two little bell shapes here, and what we're going to do is just draw some leaves coming up on that stem, just our basic leaf shape. And if you want to know more about drawing leaves, you can watch episode 3 of the Fairy Forest Garden tutorials. So now what we're going to do is draw in with pencil our shape for our petals. So we just have 4 petals in each of these flowers, and they come out in little triangle shapes. So our bottom petal there is folding over, so we can't see the end of the triangle there, so it's sort of just a line. And we also need to make sure that we have the little bits of filament coming out from the flower. And now we're just going to do the same thing on our other flower, create our 4 leaves, our folded over ones on the other side, create the shape of those petals and show that filament. Right, so now what we're going to do is trace over the lines that we've already made with our pen. So I'll just speed that up so you can see me doing that. And you'll notice as I'm doing this, I'm also shading. So I'm creating some shade in the inner part of the flower there, and I'm also going to create some shade in the middle of each of the petals to give it sort of the effect so that the petal looks like it's dipping in the middle. And I'm also just going to add some details and texture to the flower here, so I'm going to create some little wobbly lines coming up and down, and I'm also going to do a little bit of stippling just to give it a little bit more detail and also to show the pigmentation. And now we're going to move on to doing the leaves. So we're just going to start off doing double lines for the middle section of our leaves, and then we're going to draw some little lines coming out at 45 degrees from those middle sections. And we're going to do that first this time before we draw the outside of the leaf, because that's going to sort of give us the opportunity to create some little bumps in the leaf, where the outside line of the leaf is meeting the vein on the inside of the leaf. And the next thing we're going to do is shade our leaves. So to shade our leaves for this plant, we're going to use stippling, which is a technique that we looked at in the second lesson of the Fairy Forest, if you want to go check that out. But there's some fairly significant things I want to point out in the stippling of this leaf. Firstly, you need to make sure that you have a light source. So my light source is at the top right, so most of the light is going to be hitting my leaf from the top right. And secondly, you want to be stippling your leaf where you imagine that it dips down. So those little veins in the middle are bits where your leaf might dip down, and stippling in there is going to give it a really three-dimensional effect. And then also towards the edges of the leaves, your leaf might dip down, so we're going to create a little bit more stippling on the edges of the leaves. Also, take note of the fact that towards the bottom of the leaf and the left of the leaf, I've used a little bit more stippling, and that's because I just wanted to show that my light was coming from the top and the right. So let's speed this one up. Alright, so now we're going to move on to our third native, and we're going to draw some Kangaroo Paw. Now I know that Kangaroo Paw doesn't technically only bloom in the winter and autumn, but its colour does intensify in colder seasons, so that's why I've chosen this flower as well. So you see that we have just created a sort of long wavy stem, and then we're creating some other little stems coming off in about a 45-degree angle from that first stem. Again, we're just going to start off with the very basic shape, so I'm just going to draw a few sort of vague shapes of where the kangaroo paw might come out, although I will definitely refine this later on. So if you're copying this picture or copying another picture of kangaroo's paw, just try and get the main sort of geometrical shapes, and yeah, draw the flowers coming out at the right angle. Now what I'm doing is I'm just refining the shapes of the flowers that I previously created, and I'm trying to make them come out in more of like a clasping hand, more of a paw-like shape, which the kangaroo's paw is known for. As I'm doing this at the moment, I've just done a Google search for kangaroo paw, and I'm just sort of combining a whole bunch of the different images that came up on that Google search there, and trying to create the sorts of shapes that kangaroo's paws use. That's basically the method I use to get the shape of all my flowers. So yeah, if you're trying to work out how to get the shape right, if you can't do it from your imagination, definitely just do a Google search of the flower, and yeah, try and copy the sorts of shapes that come up there, starting with the wider geometric shapes and then getting more and more refined. And now I'm just going to be tracing over the shapes that I've made with my pen. So I'm going to start off with my flower. So I'm just going to draw some little circles in the middle and then some triangles coming out. So normally with a kangaroo's paw, we only have a couple of flowers blooming, and then for the rest of them we have this more paw-like closed flower shape. And now I'm just going to trace over the rest of that, so I'll speed it up again for you. I do also just want to mention though that the best way to draw anything is from life. So if you've got any native flowers at home, I know I had some kangaroo paw recently, yeah, the best way you can draw it is copying it from real life. So now what I'm going to be doing is creating some texture and shading. So I'm just doing some little bits of shading in the flower there to show the dips in the flower, and I'm also just going to stipple all over the kangaroo paw to sort of show that little furry effect that the kangaroo paw has. Which is probably also part of what gives it its name. It's furry like a kangaroo. So yeah, I'm not only going to do my stippling on the inside, but I'm going to sort of have it around the outside so that it has that more furry effect, just as I'm doing right there. So yeah, I'll speed that up for you. And just now I'm shading in the left and the bottom of all those plants with stippling to give it a more three-dimensional effect that shows that these little flowers or paws are curling and curving around. And there we have it, our completed kangaroo paw, Courier and Banksia. And here is the completed picture with all the pencil marks erased. I wish everybody the most happy of Easters, and I hope you all had fun watching this video. If you did draw these flowers along with me today, please send them to me at spriteacademyart@gmail.com, or send them to me on Facebook, and yeah, I'll see you next time. Bye.